God, please don't let my daughter shine, her mother whispered, kneeling by her bed, voice cracking as she repeated the same broken prayer again and again, begging heaven to keep her daughter small, unnoticed, unremarkable. Let no man ever look at her twice. Let no door ever open for her, she said, unaware that Chidima stood frozen just outside the room, listening to her own mother pray for her disappearance. Before we continue, if you've ever felt like something invisible was working against you, holding you back for reasons you couldn't name, you're not alone. And before we go any further, please take a second to give us a follow and like this video. It genuinely helps us to keep telling stories like this one. Once upon a time, there lived a girl so beautiful that strangers stopped mid-sentence just to look at her twice. Her name was Chidima, and for 24 years, she believed her mother's silence, her mother's warnings, her mother's strange discomfort around her own daughter's beauty was simply love, wearing a cautious face. She had no idea that the woman who raised her had spent every one of those years praying, quietly, desperately, that she would stay exactly where she was, small, unseen, forgotten. She was wrong. Chidima grew up in a small compound on the outskirts of Enugu, but even as a child she carried herself like someone the world hadn't caught up to yet. Neighbours would pause mid-conversation when she walked past, their eyes lingering a second too long, their voices dropping into quiet admiration. "That girl will go far," they'd whisper to her mother, expecting a proud smile in return. Instead, her mother would simply nod, thank them stiffly, and pull Chidima along by the wrist, as though the compliment itself were something dangerous. By 16, Chidima was already turning heads far beyond their small street. Her teachers praised her sharp mind as much as her striking looks, insisting she had the kind of presence that belonged on magazine covers, not tucked away in a quiet neighbourhood. When a modelling scout visited her secondary school during an inter-house competition, he approached her mother directly, practically pleading, "Madam, your daughter has something rare. Let me put her forward for the agency's next audition. This could change her life." Chidima remembered the excitement bubbling in her chest, the way her hands trembled at the thought of being seen, truly seen, by people who could open doors she didn't even know existed. Her mother's response was swift and cold. "She's not interested," she said, without even glancing at Chidima to confirm it. The scout tried again, sliding his card across the table, insisting there was no harm in just considering it. Her mother picked up the card, thanked him politely, and the moment he left, tore it in half without a word of explanation. Chidima cried herself to sleep that night, confused by a sadness she couldn't quite name. She told herself her mother was only being protective, that the modelling industry could be cruel to young girls, that perhaps she was shielding her from something dangerous. It was easier to believe that than to imagine the alternative, that her own mother didn't want her to be seen at all. The pattern did not stop there. A year later, a young man named Obina began coming around, gentle and hard-working, the kind of suitor every mother in the neighbourhood prayed for. He would visit on Sundays, bringing plantain and palm oil for the household, laughing easily with Chidima's uncles, asking her mother's permission before he so much as walked Chidima to the market. For months it seemed as though something good was finally being allowed to take root. Then, without warning, Obina stopped coming. He stopped answering her calls. Weeks later, Chidima learned from a mutual friend that her mother had visited his family privately, telling them things about Chidima that were not true, warnings about her temperament, her past, her supposed instability. Obina's family, alarmed, quietly pulled their son away. Chidima never got the chance to defend herself because she never even knew the accusation had been made until it was already too late. She told herself it was a misunderstanding. She told herself her mother must have had her reasons. It was easier than believing that her own mother had reached into her life and pulled it apart with her bare hands. Then came the scholarship, an opportunity to study business and design abroad, fully funded, the kind of chance that could change the entire trajectory of a young woman's life. Chidima's acceptance letter arrived at the house while she was away visiting her aunt. When she returned 3 weeks later, eager and hopeful, her mother told her, almost too calmly, that no letter had come. It wasn't until months later, cleaning out an old drawer, that Chidima found it, torn slightly at the edge, hidden beneath old newspapers. The deadline for confirmation long since passed. She stood there, holding the letter, her hands trembling, and for the first time, the word protective no longer fit what she was looking at. Piece by piece, the smaller moments began to surface in her memory. A missed interview her mother had claimed she never mentioned. A scholarship exam her mother insisted would be a waste of time. A pageant organizer who called the house twice and was told, both times, that no one by that name lived there. Always calm, always certain, always final. Chidima had spent years explaining away each incident individually, never once stepping back to see them as a single, deliberate hand steering her life away from anything that might let her shine. It wasn't until the night she overheard the prayer that she finally saw the whole shape of it. She had come home early from a friend's house, quiet on her feet, out of habit rather than intention, and passed her mother's door just as the older woman dropped to her knees. "God, please don't let my daughter shine," her mother whispered, her voice raw, desperate, unlike anything Chidima had ever heard from her before. "Let no man ever look twice at her. Let no door ever open for her." Chidima stood frozen, her back pressed against the wall outside the room, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain her mother would hear it. Every torn letter, every silenced suitor, every quiet act of sabotage rearranged itself in her mind, no longer a string of unfortunate coincidences, but a pattern with intention behind it. For the first time in her life, Chidima did not cry. She simply walked back to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and began to plan. Weeks later, a new opportunity arrived, one final chance at a fully funded scholarship and modelling program overseas, the kind of opportunity that does not knock twice. This time, Chidima did not tell her mother. She filled out the forms herself, attended the preliminary interviews in secret, and when the final invitation came, addressed directly to her, she made a decision that would have been unthinkable even a year earlier. She was going to attend, whether her mother approved or not. On the morning of her final interview, her phone rang just as she stepped out the door. It was a neighbour, breathless, telling her that her mother had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. Chidima's chest tightened. Every instinct told her to turn back immediately, and yet, standing there in the doorway, she remembered every convenient emergency, every crisis that had appeared at the exact moment something good was about to happen to her. She hesitated only a moment longer before making her choice. She would call the hospital to confirm someone was with her mother, and she would still go. The interview room was calm, composed, filled with people who had already heard about her portfolio, her grades, her presence. She answered every question with a steadiness she did not know she still had in her, her voice never once betraying the storm underneath. When she stepped out hours later, she was told, quietly and officially, that she had been selected. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt sick with worry, and she went straight to the hospital. Her mother lay in the bed, pale and fragile, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily beside her. Chidima sat down slowly, watching the woman who had spent years quietly working against her, and felt something complicated rise in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, not quite anger, something in between. It was then that a woman she had never seen before stepped into the waiting room outside, beautiful in a way that felt strangely familiar, her eyes red from crying, She asked a nurse quietly if this was where Chidima could be found, and when Chidima walked out to meet her, the woman's knees nearly buckled beneath her. She reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out an old photograph, worn soft at the edges, and held it out toward Chidima without a word. It was a picture of a young woman in a housemaid's uniform, holding an infant wrapped in white cloth, smiling down at the child as though she had never known love until that moment. "That's you," the woman said, her voice breaking. "And that's me." Chidima stared at the photograph, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The woman explained through broken breaths that the person Chidima had called mother her entire life had once been her housemaid, a quiet, hard-working young woman who had disappeared one night 24 years ago with her infant daughter, never to be seen again. For over 2 decades she had searched, hired investigators, followed false leads that went nowhere, until a photograph of a strikingly beautiful young woman began circulating locally, and a distant relative recognized something unmistakable in her face. Chidima's legs went weak beneath her. She turned back toward her mother's hospital room, the woman who had raised her, fed her, clothed her, and quietly prayed for her disappearance, for reasons she had never understood, and demanded the truth. Her mother, weak but lucid, finally spoke. She had once worked as a housemaid in a wealthy household, she said, and had fallen into a secret relationship with the man of the house. When she became pregnant, she was pressured, again and again, to end it. And each time she resisted, she was punished for her defiance. On the same night, she lost yet another pregnancy to violence at his hands. The man's wife gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Chidima's mother described standing outside the nursery window that night, watching the celebration inside, something inside her breaking completely. She had taken the child, not out of love in that moment, but out of a shattered mind that could no longer separate grief from vengeance. If she could not be a mother, then neither would the woman who still had everything she had lost. Over the years that followed, love had crept in despite everything. Real, complicated, guilty love, tangled together with the fear of discovery, and a desperate hope that Chidima would never rise high enough to be noticed by anyone who might recognize her. Outside the room, the police, already alerted by the biological mother days earlier, arrived to formally take the woman into custody. Chidima stood between the two women who had shaped her life in entirely different ways. One who gave her life and searched for her for 24 years, and one who stole that life out of pain and tried desperately, however wrongly, to keep her safe from a beauty she feared would only invite more suffering. Chidima did not scream. She did not collapse. She simply stepped back, looked at both women in turn, and said quietly, "I am not a punishment, and I am not a prize to be won. I get to decide who I am now." Then she turned and walked out of the hospital, not as a stolen child, and not as a symbol of anyone else's pain, but as a woman finally choosing her own life, on her own terms. If you were Chidima, would you have forgiven either of them? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, our colouring books make the perfect gift for anyone who needs a little stillness in their life. I hope you enjoyed this story.